Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening from wherever you're joining us around the world. Thank you for spending your time with us. I can see quite a few people still trickling through in the waiting room, so we'll just give it a few more minutes, um, and then we'll get started. In the meantime, a little bit of housekeeping for everybody. So you will receive a copy of the slides and a recording straight after, or as soon as the systems have done what they need to do to send it out to you. You'll receive it as soon as we can get it to you. So if you have to drop off for any reason or you have to take a call or whatever, and you're not going to miss anything, the Q&A is open today, so feel free to drop your questions into either the Q&A or the chat box. We'll monitor both of them, make sure we have time towards the end as well. So I'm just going to give it just a couple more minutes to see if we get a few more trickle through. I can still, yeah, people are still coming coming through, so they're probably grabbing their coffees or their maybe something stronger depending on where you are in the world. Yeah, perfect. We'll get started in just a moment. I think people are starting to trickle through. If they miss the first little bit, it's not going to be the end of the world. Right, so thank you everyone for joining us today. So here we're going to be talking about protect the keys to your critical Nutanix infrastructure. This kind of going to be all about identity resilience and how we tie that back to what you're currently doing today. So protecting your infrastructure with HYCU. So I've got myself, Chris Rogers. I'm a senior product marketing manager here at HYCU. I look after our Nutanix, anything hybrid cloud, so Nutanix, Dell, VMware, etc. All of that kind of part of the HYCU ecosystem. And I'm delighted to be joined by Ashish. Ashish, do you want to go and introduce yourself?
Sure. So I work with Chris on the product marketing team as well. So while he takes care of the Nutanix and that side of the world, I focus on IAM, which we're going to be discussing and talking about today, and a bit of the collaboration part of things as well at HYCU.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So let's dive straight in. So hopefully, we're all customers or of HYCU on the call. Um, Hopefully you've kind of maybe seen this slide before or know what we're about, but I just wanted to run you through the basics, right? So, HYCU is the number one data protection platform for Nutanix out there, right? So we've got multiple Nutanix validated designs, we've got Nutanix validated blueprints. We cover pretty much the whole ecosystem in Nutanix land, so not just virtual machines, but going through into file shares, into databases, the Kubernetes platform as well. We're really, really proud to have our NPS score at above 90 in the 91. Incredibly hard to get, especially when you're a backup vendor, right? Because typically people only want you when things go wrong. So we're already starting off on a bad foot. So we're incredibly proud of getting an NPS score of 91. And then we do have that military grade security underpinning everything we do, right? So the FIPS 140-3, NIAP common criteria, and still proudly the only data protection vendor in the world with a DISA STIG. So when we look at Nutanix, right, it's very rarely going to be the only piece of the puzzle that we have in our IT data estate, right? The modern data estate has evolved, it's grown. Nutanix might make a major component of that, but equally, we're going to be looking at other workloads, right? So we potentially have got some public cloud mixed into that. We might have some SaaS into that. And pretty much I can guarantee 99%, if not 100% of people on the call or our Nutanix customers are going to have an identity platform, right? Whether that's Active Directory or more popularly and now Entra ID or Okta, something like that. They're going to be running into those identity platforms head first. And even though the data in there, it probably isn't much in terms of the size, right? It's particularly when we're talking about like, Nutanix land or file share land, when we're talking terabytes or petabytes of data, right? The actual amount of data inside of Entra ID or Okta is, probably could fit on a USB stick, right? But it's probably some of the most critical data that we have in our organizations. So we like to think of this as the three I's in data protection. So the first one here, oh my, I've gone weird with the so the first one being infrastructure. So Nutanix, Dell, VMware, hyperscalers, etc. Where you're running your infrastructure workloads. The second one being intellectual property. So things like SQL, Oracle, generic applications you have. So I manage also Box, GitHub, Confluence. That where you're going to be storing data and um, intellectual property that you have. Whether it's a file or a repo in GitHub or a document in iManage Cloud for legal. That's all going to be your intellectual property, and the ownership belongs with you as well. And the third piece is identity. So Entra ID, Okta, AWS IAM, or Active Directory AD, right? So those are the three core pillars that we want people to make sure they're protecting at all times, right? And if you aren't protecting all of those, then there's going to be a risk in your organization, right? Obviously, we're taking the last one here as identity, and we're going to be talking identity and infrastructure as kind of like the two pieces that go together. So what we're looking at here is why identity resilience for Nutanix, right? So the first piece is, well, identity is a growing area of an attack, right? So 91% of organizations experienced an identity related incident last year. You know, that's a hell of a lot of organizations where identity was the root cause of an incident that happened. That might have been a deletion, it might have been a cyber attack, it might have been corruption, could have been all of those things. We're gonna dive into those in a little bit more detail with Ashish a little bit later on. Organizations typically have been very, very good at protecting infrastructure, data, and applications, right? We're all HYCU customers on the call, so you know how good HYCU is at seamlessly recover your infrastructure, your data, and applications, to wherever you want from whenever you want, right? We've been doing it for years and years and years, so we're in that routine of knowing how to do it, and what we should be looking for and how to protect it properly, and the risks that are associated with not protecting that. We're really good at understanding that. We've got a good grasp on it. But then we come on to the identity piece, right? And this is where we constantly, continuously see people tell us, "Oh, I don't need to protect that. I don't need to do all that. Or I didn't know I needed to protect that," right? They neglect to protect the keys to the kingdom, if you will, right? And when you think about it, that business continuity pivots around access. It pivots around being able to get back into wherever you've restored. So we could restore petabytes of data for you back into Nutanix, right? But if no one can log into it, no one can log into their applications, no one can log into that data, well, great, we've managed to recover that in minutes, right? But what's the point? Because no one can use it, right? So that's the kind of paradigm we're kind of working with here, which is like we need to make sure identity is part of that recovery piece and part of that resilience package as an overall piece, rather than just protecting VMware, just protecting Nutanix, just protecting infrastructure and applications. So, what does identity resilience really mean? Well, Ashish, I'm going to hand over to you, right? Because you're the identity expert that we've got. I brought you in for a reason, right? So people can hear you, listen to
Sure.
your insights. So, I'll build out the
Absolutely.
slide for you, and then you can kind of cover them as you wish.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, for the build-up. So yeah, I mean, as Chris was saying, identity resilience is super critical. Not just from the identity perspective, of course, independently, building resilience and protecting that is super critical, but also very important because it really cuts across your entire landscape, right? Like as you said, like Nutanix. There's no point if of recovering data back to Nutanix if you can't access that at all, right? So that's essentially why identity resilience becomes one of the core parts of the three I's that that Chris went through. And from the resilience perspective for identity, there are pretty much three pillars that we look at, right? The first one is the prevention part of it, where you would have configurations on the IAM solution. Could be around MFA, your policies, your zero trust framework, a lot of different things that you do on the platform or the solution to ensure that nobody gets in, malicious actors, or somebody trying to get privileged access or something. The second thing is detection. Now, let's say the second if somebody's sort of entered your environment, your landscape. Now, how do you detect that? And it can happen, of course. Some attackers can get through some of these security walls, but you need to be able to detect that in terms of identifying any kind of behavioral changes, some anomalies, some monitoring the misconfigurations that are happening in the environment. Now, the third thing, which often organizations actually don't think about, and these three things together forms identity resilience, not just the first two or not just any one of them, right? Or not just even recovery and continuity. All together, working together is what actually identity resilience really means. And the third pillar here, recovery and continuity, is also equally important as the first two, where if somebody's got past the first two pillars, first two gates, and now something's happened, you some sort of misconfigurations, data loss, things have been deleted, things have been encrypted. You still need to be able to recover that and continue your business, right? Continue your operations, continue access to all the different applications, your infrastructure like Nutanix, VMware, anything that you have internally, everything, right? So that continuity and the recovery is super critical, and that together is how we look at identity resilience, not just any one, two, or just any one of them, right? So it's the entire spectrum. Now, as you can see, quite a few examples here, right? So there are two things I want to highlight from what we can see here. So first thing, we can see quite a few examples like Google Cloud, Microsoft, G Suite, examples like MGM Resorts as well. So the point here is a lot of companies, a lot of organizations and IT teams believe that once we've moved to the cloud, once we have, adopted SaaS, we're all safe. There's nothing that can go wrong. I mean, my data is being taken care by the vendor. They're probably backing it up. If something happens, I can just reach out to them and they'll fix it for me, as opposed to how we would typically do on-prem where everything's on us, right? But the fact is, the first point I want to highlight is that it really is not true. You can see from the examples of Google Cloud or Microsoft where, due to a bug, there was a data loss incident in the Microsoft environment, right? So things do happen, and this is just a very, very small subset of all the different things that have, happened in the recent past in terms of data incidents due to on the cloud or in SaaS as well. Or you can see in one of the examples where an employee, a disgruntled employee, deleted and the GitHub's entire org, right? That's an insane amount of data, right? That's hours and hours and hours and hours of work, right? So it's that. And the second thing I wanted to highlight was the consequence. So, there are several examples of how millions of dollars have, an impact for organizations that have, faced any sort of data incidents. And here you can see, so to sort of back that, this is one of the researches or, one of the surveys that we did. And as you can see, 75% of the organizations say that any kind of impact on their SSO will have meaningful impact on their business. So if anything happens to their SSO or IAM, it's going to have meaningful impact, which means people won't have access. Their operations is going to be at a halt, and they cannot just access anything, right? Things are going to be at a halt completely. And of course, 75%, in my opinion, is still a low number. I would actually take it up much more than that, right? But that's the numbers we got here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when you understand where identity sits in the platform, and I think the next slides are going to show that really well, you then really understand that it's kind of like the linchpin, the central, the gravitational force that everything else revolves around, right? Like without that central linchpin, the everything else does essentially fall apart, right?
Exactly.
You can kind of mop things together, and you can kind of like use local accounts, but that's less secure and all that kind of stuff. So it really is the kind of the crux of the first point of recovery is identity, right?
Absolutely. And that's exactly, to Chris's point, that's exactly why we call that as the new control plane. Because everything, literally a lot of things, the entire data landscape and your access is controlled from the central location, right? Whether that's your cloud and your, on-prem infrastructure, your, identities or devices, all the entire SaaS landscape that your organization accesses, all of it is controlled and secured also through this central point, which is the IAM, right? But if something were to happen to it, let's say, if that data is inaccessible, there's some sort of misconfiguration due to which the solution is not able to provide access to what it's supposed to, you can see that everything's shut down, right? And when identity fails, literally everything fails. That's why this is the new control plane, and that's why it's so critical to actually back this data up, have a plan to recover if something goes wrong with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thank you. I think that kind of hits the home, right? The new control plane, I think, is really, really kind of beneficial to everyone. It's really easy to understand how if you don't have access to that control plane, right? Imagine if someone took the steering wheel off your car, right? You can no longer do anything with it, right? That you can pretty much do nothing. It's very, very similar in that case, right? So, what kind of threats to IAM, the IAM platforms face, right? So, we've spoken about kind of human error a little bit, but could you run us through some of those in terms of on the next slide and kind of what do you think are the most important ones or are they equally important? What's the kind of like most common ones you see, Ashish?
Yeah, so I think, as you said, so human error is something that we've seen because, I think, in my opinion, it's a threat that we really can't do much about. We just have to accept that it exists and live with it, right? Because it happens so often, and it could be a small misconfiguration, or it could be something like somebody deleting an entire instance, and we've seen that, right? So human error is something which I would put at the top, as you can see here, is at the top of the list where organizations, IT teams when they're doing some sort of automations or some sort of configurations can run some bulk operations that can really mess things up in totally. Second thing is, of course, cyber attacks. We saw a lot of examples in one of the previous slides that things like ransomware, things like insider threats as well can actually affect that data, can over a period of time, you know, change the configurations in a way that, let's say, 2, 3 months down the line, it can make a big impact, right? Or start deleting files and folders, and nobody can even notice that, right? That's more of an insider thing. There are so many cases of ransomware across all types of organizations today, and that's really growing significantly. And the average ransom demand that they make also is significantly increasing year on year. It's a very lucrative thing because now everybody knows that everything's in data. Data is the new currency, right? So the moment we get access to that, it cripples the entire organization. So these are, the top two. Then, of course, there are things like automation errors. A lot of organizations have some sort of scripts running, some sort of workflows that they have in place. And if they're not tested properly, or if it, hits a particular scenario, it can make some changes and deletions as well. Third-party risks also very prominent. All the integrations, any kind of integrations that you have with external platforms can actually eventually, anything that's sort of updating things, anything that's creating things, or, sort of cleaning up can take one wrong step and, delete some data as well. And finally, something which happens rarely but can have massive impact is disasters and technical failures, right? Like we've seen the case, again, one of the examples where Google Cloud deleted an entire it's a massive, large-scale technical failure or disaster, right? So these things are very, I mean, these things happen in reality. These are not hypothetical, and a lot of these, like all these points that we've sort of listed here, are from our customer conversations and actual experiences that they've had,
So what
and
will be
that's
the
why.
solution, right?
Yeah, sorry.
This, I was going to
That
ask,
exactly.
what's the solution, Ashish? Tell me.
Exactly. So, and that's why we've sort of worked on this comprehensive IAM data protection on HYCU R-Cloud, which essentially protects the entire, a lot of vendors do today. It's really required because a lot of organizations, and I'm sure quite a few of them on the call today as well, not just use one of them, but actually use 2 to 3 of them together, right? We've seen so many examples of customers using Entra ID and Okta together. And it makes a lot of sense because each of them have their own use cases, each of them have their own strengths. So in a lot of cases, large organizations protect them together in using the same interface and control all of it from a single point, which is a very, very big thing because you'd want that unified protection. You want that unified management of your IAM backups and resilience from the single platform, so you can easily do it, and you're sort of aligned in terms of protection. So some of the things that more to the platform can do, but some of the key things that in terms of what the platform offers. One, every week or even every month. It's just you set up your policies at the beginning. You define how you want to, you know, uh, you can define how you want to sort of structure your frequencies, your retention policies, everything at the beginning. Set these policies up, and that's it. It's on autopilot. You never have to come back until you have to recover that data, which hopefully is never. Then flexible retention. So of course, would like to retain this data for a much longer period due to compliance and regulations reasons or auditing reasons as well. So that's completely up to the customers. Faster backups in some of these, cases like Entra ID, we can actually do incremental backups. So what essentially that can do, have really low RPOs, right? So you can actually have very frequent backups being taken off your Entra ID flexibility. And from a DR perspective, you have cross-tenant restores and offline exports. So let's say Entra ID is down or your Okta tenant is down, you can actually do cross-tenant restores as well. So from your backup, you can just spin up a new Okta tenant and just restore restore from this backup to the new tenant, right? If your primary tenant is down or your production tenant is down, and you can also export that data and use it externally, and you can sort of get access to that data even if the service is down. Yeah, so I think one of the, again, a very, very critical point is the security and compliance of things, right? Especially because we're talking about IAM, which is, very, very close to security. I think it's really, how sort of HYCU manages all of these backups and how that works. Like how is it compliant with whatever customers require? So first and most important thing is the encryption part of it. So all of the data is actually encrypted from the beginning, so end to end. So right from when it's being, and we have, of course, all of it is stored outside the, either Microsoft or Okta, environments in the customer's environment. As you can see on the right, you can keep it on cloud. You can keep it on something like an AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or you can actually. And we, of course, have multiple copies, so it doesn't rely on only the primary copy. You can also recover from a secondary or your archive copies, and you can also take, never touches that, right? Because, of course, something as important and critical as IAM data, you'd want to keep it within your environment, in your control, in your storage. So that's something that you can definitely do with HYCU. And of course, there are things like SSO, MFA, RBAC to ensure that the access to the HYCU platform itself is secure and that nobody can just come in and do restores or recoveries when they're not supposed to. And finally, there's immutability. So all of this data is immutable. So in the case of
Thanks, Ashish. Yeah, this is really, really valid. But I saw on that screen we had Nutanix objects on there, right? So it really is tying those worlds together as well. Like, as I said, the amount of data that is in these IAM configurations is relatively small, right? We're not talking like hundreds of gigas of data. It's probably less than a couple of gigs of data to actually back this up. So actually having that in multiple copies in multiple places is never going to be a bad thing. It's not going to cost an absolute fortune to run. It's not going to be something that we have to worry about egress fees on. So actually keeping that data locally, keeping it in the cloud, keeping a copy off site somewhere as well, I think it's only gonna get better and only gonna add to our resilience as well. So now I want to just cover off a bit of an extra piece. Knowledge is power, right? So we now understand that identity and infrastructure is kind of like linked, right? And is everything else in our estate. And when we look at that modern data estate slide that we had earlier on, we can see that we are in a world where it's not just Nutanix land anymore, right? It's not just a VMware or Nutanix or virtual machines and file shares. We're in this land where data and applications and IP and identity are spread across the whole landscape, right? So how do we know what we're doing right? How do we identify our weak spots, right? So when we typically look at organizations, right, they're really, really good at, you know, VMware, but if they're VMware built data protection solutions, they're not purpose built for Nutanix, right? So they're not designed that, and they slow down recovery. When we look at modern applications and PaaS, like the people are going, oh, I'll use the API and script it myself and take copies of the data. Yeah, okay, you can do that, but they're not protected, right? They're not done in the same way. They haven't got the same level of governance, the same level of compliance, the same level of immutability, all the stuff that Ashish just covered there. And then when we look at further up, right, SaaS applications are now the number one target for cyber attacks in organizations. Right, so it's not just about infrastructure, identity, and IP, right? It's a combination of all of them. We have to be responsible for every single one of those in our footprints now. And the average mid-sized organization in the world has 217 SaaS applications running. How do we possibly know about all of those things that are running in our environment? Well, I've got a lovely answer for you, and that is HYCU R-Cloud and HYCU R-Graph. So HYCU R-Cloud is our resiliency cloud. It's our complete platform that lets you discover and visualize your entire data estate, protect all of those workloads with secure bulletproof backups, and rapidly recover entire workloads, single items, depending on what the application or what the data is you're recovering, all the way down to granular levels of those. So inside of our cloud, we have this discover and visualization tool called rGraph. So this really lets you understand what's happening in your environment. And I'd urge everyone on the call to potentially think about running this in your environment because you'll be amazed at what you uncover, what you didn't know was running in your environment. So first of all, we connect Okta or Entra to our graph, read only, obviously. We then build out some categories for you, so infrastructure, DevOps, ITSM, collaboration, etc. We visualize all the applications in those directories, right? So Nutanix, GCP, GitHub, Jira, Box, etc. We then discover anything else that we can find. We start building out this, and then we tell you based on our catalog and based on our understanding is what level of protection do those applications or that data set have natively, right? So limited recovery, there's no customer backups and no offsite backups currently compliant to that 3-2-1 rule. Right? And then as soon as you go in and you configure, let's say GitHub, and you configured Entra ID and you configure 365 for backup through our cloud, you start seeing these being protected, right? And you start seeing nice green ticks. This is great from like a first point of view, right? So to understand what your estate looks like, expose those gaps, understand your risks, but also as an ongoing tool to see if your DevOps team are spinning out new tooling or if your HR department have just gone and bought Salesforce and you didn't know about it, right? So all these things are really, really helpful, especially from an infrastructure point of view as well. Typically, infrastructure and backups have been linked at the hip, right? So the backup platforms were tied to the infrastructure platforms because that's where they lived for the vast majority of their life. And now those same administrators are being tasked with backing up 365 and Entra and now Salesforce and now GCP and Azure, right? So you're the Nutanix admins and the sysadmins of the world are starting to stretch their scope far beyond what's on premises and what's tied to Nutanix or whatever else now. So it's really, really good to understand what's happening in your business and what's happening in your organization right in one screen, right where you want to protect the applications. And it's a great way of saying, hey, like we have got risk we didn't know about. Do you know what? We think we're protected the best we possibly can be because look at all these green ticks we've got. So that's a way of discovering that. And then once you want to go and protect, it's super easy inside of our cloud to protect that as well. And then a little bit of a brag slide from HYCU here. So HYCU named a leader in the IDC MarketScape for worldwide SaaS data protection for 25-26. So what I'm really, really proud of us on this slide is we say we are a leader. I think it's quite clear from the top right that we are the leader in this category. Right, we're quite a way ahead of anyone else, which is amazing to see. But we've beaten out some of the biggest names in the world, right? Who have budgets 5, 10, 100 times what we have for marketing and development and everything else. But the beauty is also we don't only do SaaS data protection, right? So there's vendors on this graph that they only do SaaS data protection. Whereas we can brag, we can do all of the infrastructure. We can do Nutanix, VMware, Azure Local, Hyper-V, file shares, Azure, AWS, GCP, Kubernetes, all of these other places, plus all of this SaaS applications that we've been speaking about as well. The most comprehensive IAM coverage in the marketplace as well. So when you start looking at it and taking a step back and looking at this in isolation, and you look at it from just SaaS, yeah, we lead in SaaS. But then you add all of the other things that we can potentially do at HYCU, and you can really get that consolidation story, really powerful cost savings, really powerful simplification of data protection into a single platform, onto a single vendor with a single user experience. And that really is super, super powerful as our data spreads to more and more different places. And we need to try and control that sprawl, bringing everything back into one nice, cozy place, which is HYCU. That's a really, really nice place to be. You log into one place, you can see everything you need. So thank you for your time today. So if you are interested in learning more, you can start a free trial for Microsoft Entra ID. So scan the QR code on the screen right here. Or if you want to just explore our marketplace and see what else we can protect, have a look and scan the QR code on the right-hand side. And inside of the vast majority in the marketplace, you'll have a product tool. So you'll be able to click through and see how we protect Entra, what we can recover, and all those bits and pieces as well. So take a look through those two as well. And you would have seen a poll pop up So if you're interested in a live custom demo with one of our team, press yes. We'll obviously know who you are, and we'll reach out and contact you for your account management team to make sure that we get that arranged. So Sheesh, I think we're bang on time for half an hour. Do we have any questions? I think we might have one in the chat that I can see.
Yeah, I think so I think it's a good one. So I think somebody's asked, if we can protect the conditional access policies in Entra ID. So yeah, I mean, we definitely can. So I think from the perspective of Entra cross-tenant restores, incremental backups, point-in-time restores, and a lot of different things. So yes, to answer that question, yes, we do also cover the conditional access policies today for Entra ID.
Amazing. Well, that's all the questions we have from today. So I appreciate everyone's time on the call, and thank you, Ashish. I know it's relatively late where you are, so I
Absolutely.
appreciate appreciate you staying up and spending your time with us. But thank you, everyone.
Absolutely.
Keep an eye out for the next ones that are coming in this series. This is going to be an ongoing series we do with trying to tie in Nutanix with the rest of the platform to really expose where those potential gaps are in people's coverage. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you all on the next one.
Thank you.